Hi guys, Sean here from DigiDirect. Today we're taking a look at the new Sony ZV-E10. This camera is an evolution of Sony's popular ZV-1, which is a video and vlogging focused camera. It takes a lot of features and concepts from the ZV-1, but unlike the ZV-1, which is a compact camera with a 1-inch size sensor and non-interchangeable lenses, the ZV-E10 has an APS-C sensor and it has interchangeable lenses using Sony's popular E-mount system. It's a bit of a blend between the A6100 and the ZV-1, so I'll be making comparisons to both of these cameras here. Note I'm also shooting this video right now on the ZV-E10, 4K, 25 frames per second, and I'm using continuous autofocus and eye detect, so you can see how that performs. Let's start by taking a look at the body of the ZV-E10. So at first glance, this is very similar looking to the A6100, although there are a few key differences. The build is a little bit plasticky, although that's really to be expected at this price point, which by the way is about $1,100 Australian body only, so it's quite inexpensive. There's an on-off switch here. There's a zoom rocker if you're using an electronic zoom lens like the kit 16 to 50mm lens. There's a large record button, and we've got this nifty toggle switch that goes between photo, video, and slow and quick video modes. It has a hot shoe mount here, which is going to work with flash or also with Sony's on-camera shotgun microphones. And speaking of mics, it inherits the special stereo 3-capsule internal mic from the ZV-1, and it also comes with that same hot shoe mounted dead cat, which is going to reduce wind noise on the internal mic when you're shooting outdoors. We're going to test that later. But if you want to use a non-Sony external mic on the camera, of course you can mount that on the hot shoe as well, and the camera has mic and headphone jacks, as well as HDMI and USB-C ports. The camera is charged via USB, by the way, and you can charge it while it's recording even. One major difference from the A6100 is the lack of a viewfinder. However, what it gains is a fully articulating screen, which allows you to flip the screen all the way out and to the side. This is in contrast to the tilting or flipping screens on the other A6000 series cameras, none of which have a fully articulating screen. This is also a touchscreen, by the way, although unfortunately it's still not one where the touch controls work in the menus. A few other notable buttons are the defocus button and the product showcase button. We'll go through these later. There's a single UHS 1 SD card slot. And finally, the ZV-E10 has a W series battery, which is going to give it better battery life than the ZV-1 does with its smaller battery. So of course, one of the main differences between the ZV-E10 and the ZV-1 is the sensor. The ZV-E10 has a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. This is actually the same sensor that we've seen previously on the A6100 and the A6600. It's a known quantity. It's a very high quality sensor. It does very good image quality. Now the reason why this would be desirable over the 1-inch sensor on the ZV-1 is that an APS-C sensor has about 3 times the area of a 1-inch sensor. This means the sensor can collect more light. So when using equivalent lenses, the ZV-E10 is going to be better than the ZV-1 at low light shooting. That larger sensor also allows you to get more shallow depth of field, which is that blurry background look that's very popular in both photos and videos. To that end, let's take a look at the defocus control button. This is a simple one-touch way of getting a blurry background. So here's it with it off, and then I press that, turn it on, and you can see the background gets a lot blurrier. Now, this is a feature that was on the ZV-1 as well, but with the larger sensor on the ZV-E10, you're going to be able to achieve more blurrier backgrounds than you could on the ZV-1. Now, of course, you can achieve this just manually by shooting manually and adjusting your settings to the right settings. This is just an easy one-touch way of doing it. Of course, how much blurry background you're going to get also comes down to the lens you're using, which is going to be relevant when considering if you want the ZV-E10 or the ZV-1, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. Another really nice feature that makes its way from the ZV-1 is the product showcase mode. I'm always quite impressed when I test this one out. This is a feature where it's going to keep your face in focus normally, but once you present an object up to the camera, it's going to rack focus to that object, keep that in focus so whoever is watching the video can clearly see what you're showing, and then once you take the object away, it'll go back to your face. The speed and accuracy with which it does this is really quite impressive. This is a great feature if you're maybe doing makeup tutorials, you're showing the makeup off to the camera, the product, anything really where you're presenting any item up to the camera. This is a really, really nice feature. All right, so let's talk about the video specs of the ZV-E10 directly. The camera can shoot 4K video at up to 30 frames per second. Like the other A6000 series cameras that share the same sensor, this is actually shot in 6K and then downsampled to 4K, which gives it a really nice crisp look. You can also shoot it up to 100 megabits per second. Now, when you're shooting at 4K 30 frames per second, there is a slight crop, but if you drop down to 24 or 25 frames per second, like I'm shooting here, that crop goes away. The camera can also shoot 120 frames per second slow-mo in full HD, or you can use it to shoot time lapses using the interval timer. Even better, there is no 30-minute record limit on the ZV-E10 like there are on many other cameras. This means you can record as long as you have memory card space left and battery power, and considering that the camera can charge via USB while shooting, that's very flexible. So any use case where you're shooting for a long period of time, event videography, concerts, a video like this that I'm making right now, that's a very useful feature to have. And then also the ZV-E10 comes with Sony's picture profile, so S-Log2, S-Log3, HLG, which are better for color grading in post-production. Those picture profiles were on the ZV-1 as well, but they were not on the A6100. All right, so here's a vlogging test with pretty harsh lighting conditions. I've got it on shutter priority right now to see how it deals with, the sharp backlighting, and I'm walking through shadows and so on as well. I can see the autofocus is doing a great job. It's got a box right around my face. It's got my eye in focus too, so if I move in and out, move across the frame, it's gonna have me in focus the whole time. Now I'm using, you'll probably hear these cars here, I'm using the internal mic, so that background noise is gonna be fairly loud. I am using the included built-in wind mic over there. So there is a bit of a breeze right now, so that's going to stop some of that wind noise. I also have active steady shot enabled, which is going to reduce some of the jitters from me walking with the camera, but it does introduce a 1.44 times crop into the image. So let's see what it looks like without that enabled. So this is now with the active steady shot disabled. So you can see that's a much more pleasing field of view, a lot wider, big difference there. Although it is not going to reduce my handheld jitters as much because I'm walking. So, depending on your situation, you might want to use that or not, depending on the lens you're using. This is the 16 to 50 mm lens I'm using, so if you had the 10 to 18, you could go a bit wider and still use the active steady shot. Those are options as well. So now I've switched over to using the Rode Video Mic Pro for my audio. I've got that mounted on top of the camera instead of the internal mic, so you can hear the difference there. That should be picking up less background noise like these cars. You'll probably still hear it, but it's going to isolate my vocals a lot better because it's a shotgun mic, it's directional, and is pointed directly at my mouth from about 2 feet away. All right, let's make some direct comparisons between the ZV-E10 and the ZV-1 with the goal of determining whether the ZV-E10 just completely replaces the ZV-1, or are there reasons why someone might choose the ZV-1 over the ZV-E10 still. We've already discussed the advantages of the larger sensor on the ZV-E10. What I haven't mentioned is that the ZV-1 does have a much faster readout on its sensor, which means there's a lot less rolling shutter. Rolling shutter is somewhat pronounced on the ZV-E10 here, as you can see. The ZV-1 also has built-in ND filters, which for shooting video is very useful because you're almost always going to be needing video ND filters when shooting in daylight in order to keep your shutter speed under control. Although it is worth mentioning that with the more standardized lens sizings on the ZV-E10, it'll be easier to get and use traditional ND filters with the ZV-E10. Now the last important point I want to touch on is the kit lens on the ZV-E10, which is the 16 to 50mm f3.5 to 5.6. This is a perfectly fine lens, it does a good job, but it's not a lens that's really going to let you take advantage of the shallow depth of field or low light shooting offered by the larger sensor on the ZV-E10. If your plan is to just use the kit lens and never upgrade, you might as well get the ZV-1 because you're not really going to notice the difference of the larger sensor. So really, to take advantage of that, you're going to have to look at, eventually at least, going beyond the kit lens. Now this doesn't have to be super expensive. You could look at, for example, the Sony 50mm f1.8 as a very affordable way to achieve very good shallow depth of field and low light shooting with the ZV-E10. But it is an added expense and something that you should be aware of. Overall, I think the ZV-E10 is a great camera. It offers a lot of very well implemented and legitimately important video features, like the fully articulating screen, the upgraded internal mic and headphone jack for external mics, slow and quick shooting, product showcase mode, background defocus mode, S-Log picture profiles, no record limit, and so on. It's also quite an affordable camera. As I mentioned, it comes in at about $1,100 Australian for the body only, which I think for the feature set is quite a strong price. I don't think it completely replaces the ZV-1. Those who aren't too fussed about the larger sensor in the ZV-E10 and who also want a really small camera and one that is still a bit more affordable will go for the ZV-1. But for someone who wanted those cool features that were introduced in the ZV-1 in a larger sensor camera that they can really experiment with and make the most use out of that larger sensor, I think the ZV-E10 is a very good choice. Now you can order the ZV-E10 on our website at www.digidirect.com.au, Or you can visit us in store following COVID-safe procedures, of course. We have stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and Cannington, Western Australia, which is just outside the Perth CBD. Thanks, guys. Take care.